Hello, I'm Ann Gritch, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special segment of the history of the Diocese of San Jose. Today, we will be talking about Msgr. Eugene Boyle, who is a towering figure in the history of our diocese. He's one of the founding fathers of the diocese. He also was known nationally as an advocate for social justice, was a good friend of Cesar Chavez and Bobby Kennedy. Sadly, Msgr. Boyle died before this project began. So what we did was to ask many of his friends and co-workers for their memories of Msgr. Boyle. So this is what we will be listening to and looking at. The first person who will be talking about Msgr. Boyle is his good friend, Msgr. Al Larkin.
He was one of those great men. I kind of put him probably in the category of a Peter York. San Franciscans, old-time San Franciscan would know Peter York, but he was making his mark back in the 50s with the first with a radio program called Underscore, and a first interfaith radio program. And one of the people that he got to be very close with was Rita Semmel. And they were lifelong friends. And he, at one point, had a radio program on, it was the radio program out of Berkeley. KPFA. That was what I was thinking of. That wasn't as well known as Underscore, and then he was in the mission band.
Yes, I remember
and
that.
He was classically trained. He was a rhetorician. He gave us a retreat when I was at St. Patrick's Seminary, and it was using stuff out of Duquesne University at that time, very current, and just masterfully delivered. He really worked at that. He's responsible for building all the new buildings at Vallombrosa. When he went there, the old mansion was the only building. He built the chapel, which he was very proud of. He taught at St. Patrick's Seminary, taught a course in nowadays what we call it social justice, and had a very important influence on some of the people in that class. One of them, Patrick Johnson, became a California state legislator. Another, Clint Riley, became very important in managing political campaigns, and again, lifelong friends. After leaving at St. Patrick's Seminary, he got dismissed by Archbishop McGuckin, and while there, one of the things he had done after the riots, he had assigned a class project called the Little Kerner Report, looking at race relations in the Bay Area. And I forget exactly the presenting cause with Archbishop McGuckin, but it created quite a disturbance. And the Archbishop agreed to submit the decision to arbitration. And John Tracy Ellis said that was a first in the United States history. He went to Sacred Heart Parish in San Francisco, where he welcomed a breakfast program that was being run by the Black Panthers, which was infiltrated by the FBI, who distributed racist coloring books to discredit the program, the Panthers, and him. He ran for city council. He ran for office,
Right.
And was not successful. But he was placed on administrative leave during that time. And then it was following that he came to St. Anne's as director of the Newman Center, and really was the first to hire a full-time campus minister to be on campus full-time. Father Msgr had been there, but Father Msgr really had worked more with faculty than with students. So he really created a whole new development for the Newman Center. And of course, he had marched at Selma, and he has a famous photograph of him giving communion to Cesar Chavez when Cesar broke his fast. He broke it by receiving communion.
And in the background, I think,
is
was
Bobby Kennedy. Yes.
Yeah.
And then as the vicar for interfaith and ecumenical affairs in the diocese, he started the Catholic-Jewish dialogue. And toward the end of his time was starting the Catholic-Muslim dialogue. That got started with Pierre, I think it was Pierre, and then and it didn't develop steam. It's picked up again more recently. Well, with the Catholic-Jewish dialogue, when the euthanasia program came out initiative first came out, the rabbis and the Bishop Dumaine were able to draft a common statement. And that was possible because of the level of conversation and trust that had developed.
Gene was someone who always had broad vision. He was a great reader. I don't know if he slept very much at night because he read so much in his time. He was known as a bright light in the diocese because many people might not have remembered there was a diocesan mission band.
Yes, I hold that's going way back.
Yes, that Archbishop Mitty put together because Mitty was not too happy about the Jesuits and the Dominicans and Franciscans being considered the ones who can give missions. He said diocesan priests can do that.
All right.
So we got the best preachers together to do that, and Eugene Boyle became part of that. And he went down to Stanford University as Newman chaplain, and he did something that was not able to be done from the beginning with Stanford. Stanford did not allow Catholic services or things to happen on the university campus. That's why St. Anne's Chapel was built.
Because it was away from campus.
Yeah, Claire Booth Luce, her daughter who was a student, was killed in an accident, so she built that for them. So they had things there. But Gene, went and through his connections with the campus, got ways where they could have celebrations at the Memorial Chapel and do things on the campus. So he really
huge.
It was huge for Stanford and for everything. I mean, because now, I think that's the largest events that are happening on there.
I think so.
Religious events are there with the Catholic community there.
Yeah, which is flourishing.
Yeah. But anyway, that's, again, what Gene could do on things. And then when the diocese was formed, that's when when I actually came into the office at the time, at around 85, that's when Pierre asked Gene to come into the office in charge of interreligious and public affairs. So it had to do with connecting ecumenically, doing things like that. Also the spokesman for the diocese. So Gene was very much involved in the whole thing with the Vietnamese, with the Cupertino project.
Oh, yes.
You know, all these things that were happening. He was very much involved there. And he was very bright, and he could do things very well.
Well, I remember when he was first sent to St. Anne's. I remember his first homily because the way he took the gospel just was so right on, and it was so great. I had to go out right back after Mass and tell him, you know, and that started it between the two of us. And we became close friends. He had me on campus ministry. I asked him to be spiritual director of a Cursillo we were working on. He was over at the house a lot. He and Carl got on famously. So this was something we could all be a part of. My mother, who was living with us after a while, loved him to pieces. They had the same birthday. They celebrated it together every year. He was there New Year's Eve. He was there Christmas. He was family. He was family. My kids, he's family. He was a brilliant man, talented, very, very caring. Our friendship lasted all the way to the very end. I was with him in the afternoon. Maureen Locke and I went to see him the afternoon of the day that he passed. He was totally dedicated to wherever there was a need. And he talked about his time visiting Caesar in prison. He also talked about the time he went to prison. And his involvement with Dolores Huerta and the other farm workers. And that's when he learned to fly, because it was taking too long to drive to all of these events. So he learned to fly, and he would take out a plane and travel to
The Central Valley.
the
or
Central
wherever, yeah.
Valley and wherever he needed to be. And the other commitment he had that just stirred me deeply was his commitment that terms the March with Martin Luther King to ending racism and the struggles that he had. He and Father Hester were both involved in the march in Selma. And in San Francisco at Sacred Heart Parish, he was having breakfast for the children of the Black Panthers. Nothing to do with the Black Panthers themselves, their ideology or anything, just simply the children were hungry. And comic books were found, and horrible, you know, this priest and all of that, and it was stopped. And later on, it came out that the FBI had actually planted those comic books to disgrace, you know. He would sometimes push me where I wasn't, maybe thought I wasn't ready to go.
Oh, Gene could do that.
And he could do that, and he could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gene was extremely well read in a lot of areas of political
To
theory.
the day he died.
To the day he
was
died,
reading.
and he was Gene. With Gene, there was, of course, and I have all of his books. He gave me his library. Really, an impressive array of literature. Obviously, a lot on political theory, a lot on movements, a lot on farm worker books, which you really don't have those kinds of books around anymore. They're not even on iBooks, obviously. So a lot of that stuff, he did this thing called a Little Kerner report.
Yes.
Which was really a pivotal place, and he would talk about this. And I want to kind of say this because it really is one of the more kind of foundational pieces for the Diocese of San Jose. Is that the Little Kerner report came at a time before the diocese was formed, but it was in the Archdiocese, which throughout the country, everything was exploding in racial tension. Everything was exploding in terms of the Vietnam War and
late 60s, early 70s.
right. Well,
mid-70s.
this what was happening at the time. Of course, it was the collusion between established law enforcement, FBI, and established political powers to try to suppress and silence the voices of people asking questions, which is why Gene, I think, was really kind of like why we found this older priest that was this radical guy, was because he appreciated the question. The Little Kerner report was an echo of the Kerner report that took place in D.C. and nationwide. Well, the Little Kerner report followed a methodology of taking existing materials, of existing research, and putting that together to ask the question, what's going on in San Francisco with race and economics? What's happening? Let's look at these pieces. And so amazing, brilliant students at that time, because the seminary had, at that time had amazing students, and they had put together this research that was already there, but the key was the integrative research, which is to take materials that are studies and then put it together in this kind of one source, and then be in dialogue with that source by asking specific hyper-local questions about how is this showing up in San Francisco? Because at that time, you had the Western Edition was an absolute. I mean, he was at Sacred Heart, right? Or they call it Secular Heart, and there was all this stuff that was going on. And the institutional church was not willing to party with those who are the asking questions directly for the poor. And what happened at that time, I believe, is McGuckin was
Archbishop, yes.
Archbishop McGuckin was not too enthused by Gene, acting as the academic advisor for these students to ask these very difficult questions of the power establishment in San Francisco, to say, is this right? Because at that time, this is pre-Harvey Milk. So there was this kind of structure in the Archdiocese archdiocesan structure that was very much patterned and modeled in terms of status quo and keeping things the same as the people elected to the city council.
Oh, we laughed. They were half Irish and half Italian.
Right, because it wasn't representative of the neighborhoods.
Exactly.
Right, and so this is all part of this movement that really kind of allowed Harvey Milk and others to raise that question: should we be directly, of the neighborhoods, really of the people, rather than of kind of a citywide thing with only people that had access to money and access to campaign funds could get the, and so Gene saw this as structural injustice. So he was amazing about this, right? So he got the students to do this. Students were called in, raked over the coals. Gene was exiled. All these kinds of things. People talk about how did he learn to fly and this whole farm workers thing, because he got into the farm worker stuff. And,
Oh, did he ever?
and he learned to fly because you need to get from point A to point B in a very quick
The best way is in
and
the air.
The only way to do it was in the air. So he took flying lessons, and he was a pilot, and eventually he just did a lot of flying all over the place, and he just loved it. To the very end, he just wished he could fly, and then he couldn't anymore. Thank God, because his driving wasn't great at the end, but his flying would have been worse. But the other piece that really struck me was, again, the love of the passion of the farm workers, and that kind of led us to when we worked together at St. Catherine's, because they pulled him out of retirement. The guy just was retired. And I was at St.
Prior to
Catherine's.
that, he had been very much involved in the creation of the diocese, as far as it.
Creation of the diocese, the establishment of the Office of Interreligious and Public Affairs,
And the opening of the cathedral.
but before the opening of the cathedral, it was dealing with the Vietnamese.
Oh, yes.
The Vietnamese
That's when I
issue.
came on board. That was huge.
Right, and what he tried to do, he really tried to help. Of course, he and Jim McEntee, and I mean, he's a guy that we ought to. Jim McEntee was another kind of partner in crime, as it were. Felt that dialogue is the most appropriate methodology that one should use in helping, try to resolve some of these, conflicts that seemed, to be going nowhere. And it was escalation, and it's sort of like, you think the institution would learn from its long history past that staying stuck in your story is not going to get you far with anybody. It's only going to create schism or anger or revolution. I was a seminary at the time, so we were kind of not blissfully, but we were purposely left out of that, that conflict. Gene told me post-mortem that it was he and McEntee, it was about that dialogue. How do we create dialogue? So that, that was very difficult. He learned that by trying to deal with the farm workers and the landowners. That it's that dialogue, but when the landowners, the vineyard owners, were not treating the farm laborers with respect and giving them the right to negotiate the conditions of their work, their salaries, just these pieces that are fundamental to Catholic social doctrine. When they weren't allowing that to happen, of course, Gene got his Irish up and, fought. But his belief was that we need to be in the same place. We need to talk together. I mean, that was a really big piece about Gene's stuff. And so, that kind of stuff was, sadly, it's lost, that he never really there was no systematic telling of Gene's life or his experience. I hope that at some point I'll be able to do some writing around this, but I've taken his theories and taken his talks and incorporated them as part of my own work. I like to think that because he was preparing me for all my years and early years as a priest, and then when I became newly ordained, working with him at St. Catherine's through a very difficult time at St. Catherine's, he was able to really get us to think through how do you do social change. And it is through pickets, it is through some stoppages, it is through a number of kinds of things, but probably the most effective and the least costly is conversation and dialogue, to talk. And it's creating, and the trick is, do we make space for us to listen? And do we make space for us to, resolve our conflict? And that's kind of what Gene, his big thing was about that.
Oh my goodness, Father, Eugene Boyle. He's one of the priests that really touched my heart. He was retired and was asked to come to St. Catherine's at that time to take over the parish community. And he was so gracious to say yes to the Bishop Domain. And I remember that he relished the job. It just brought life to him. He loved every minute. And what he did for us is he built team, because I was new, but then the other staff had gone through challenges right before he came, and it kind of pulled, the morale was not the best. And what Father Boyle did was he built a team where we could laugh again and know each other. He did one-on-ones. We had I remember a parish retreat, and he asked us to meet with each other one-on-one, and we just spent time in a wonderful relational conversation with each. And that was the way we did the staff retreat. And then he also invited his friend Terry Icino to lead us in a staff retreat. And I remember she came with a bright orange shirt, and it said, "Obey me."
I know that shirt, yes.
and I just thought, great, a woman just being strong and knowing who she is, and yeah, that was her role for that time.
And people did obey.
And people, yes, it was. Yeah, she kept us in order for that. But it was a great team building experience, and he built a family. At the time, I had the lasting relationships I have with priests, Father John Pettico, Father Rick Rodoni. They were all part of the staff at the time. And then Rosemary Peoples and Judith Seahaver, they're my closest friends today. So what Father Boyle began, it was cement for us. He built a family among us. We appreciate each other. And I had remembered him from my time at St. Patrick, because he was in charge of ecumenical affairs, but also I knew of his work of justice. Yeah. And whenever I think of him, I think of his big smile and booming voice. And I got the honor of seeing him in the months before he died, and visited him in the place that his residence in Palo Alto. And that was, he remembered me, and he greeted me with the same smile he always gave me. And he still had a zest for life. He kept up with all the newspapers and all the news.
He was a reader.
Yes. Oh. And he passed on his legacy to all of us, but especially to Father John Pettico. And I see Father John following in the footsteps of Msgr. Boyle. And we need priests like that. So he's still alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's still alive in our hearts.
He's one of our great ones.
He's one of our great ones.
Yeah.
And towards the end of his days, his attention went to a lot of readings in eschatology. Ah. So he was really, really concerned about how do we understand the eschatology. I mean, we've had a number of talks, of course, about his own, on which I think is the proper form, but I mean, of his own personal journey and his struggles as a human person, and what it meant to be the leader. But I remember asking him, because I said, of all these things that went on, why didn't you just leave? And it ties into this, his belief towards the end of his life is returning to this deep faith. And he said, you have to make a fundamental choice for Christ and the church. That has to be that first question. And yeah, the institution didn't treat him well. It punished him. It exiled him. It ignored him. The funny story was when everybody else in his class was being made a Monsignor, he was purposely left off. So his friends, what they did is they had a giant You're not a Monsignor party for him. That's what I call it. It was a giant party where they got together while everyone else is getting the red, the red capes. This is back in, I guess, the 70s or something.
Right.
And he didn't get it. And there's a part of him that, was really bothered by it, because of his age and his generation.
Well,
that was
an acknowledgement.
an acknowledgement. So he didn't get that. And he had, there was a part of him that needed that acknowledgement.
Oh, yes.
Part that, but he didn't get it, but his friends
Gave him a party.
huge party at a very fancy hotel. I think it was St. Francis or something.
Oh,
like
right.
that.
Top of the line.
Top of the line. And anyway, it was he of course reveled in that stuff. For me, I would find that annoying and embarrassing, but he reveled in it all.
Well, he finally was made a Monsignor.
He was made a Monsignor. You're right. He was made a Monsignor towards the end after retirement, of course. And then he was brought back into work some more.
You've heard the many wonderful things that Monsignor Boyle contributed to the Diocese of San Jose. One of the awards that he received that he particularly treasured was given to him by our first bishop, Bishop Pierre Dumaine, and I am delighted to be able to read it to you now. It reads, "Long before the bishops of the world summed up the Catholic social teaching of this century, Father Eugene Boyle envisioned it and acted on it in every mission to which he was sent and to all people in need to whom he was called. From the prophet Micah, this is what Yahweh asks of you, only this, to act justly, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly with your God." And from the World Synod of Bishops, to act on behalf of justice and to participate in the transformation of the world fully appears to us as constitutive dimension of the preaching of the gospel and of the Church's mission for the redemption of the human race and its liberation from every kind of oppression. Offered in gratitude and admiration on behalf of the bishop, clergy, and faithful of the Diocese of San Jose in California, on the occasion of his Golden Jubilee of Priesthood, 16 June 1996, and was signed Pierre Dumaine, Bishop of San Jose in California.